Yes, and which is why theologians have come to, from a philosophical standpoint, to the idea of an unmoved mover or uncaused cause.
Yeah,
Or
but think about this in terms of the argument here. Is that the reason why people are convinced by the Aristotle argument of the unmoved mover is the idea that something has to start the movements. But that doesn't follow per se from the evidence Aristotle or any other philosopher has gathered, which is everything has a cause.
But what if Aristotle had put that together with everything breaking down over time?
All right, go for it.
Well, that wouldn't suggest a greater impulse of energy into the creative action. Would suggest less over time. And so that things would finally break down, and this would not occur. Or occur to a lesser and lesser degree over this infinite process.
I mean, if the question is, you're talking about
entropy.
What's the word? Entropy, yes. Yeah. Well, I think bringing into entropy, well, first of all, another topic that the scientists have laid claim over.
Yeah, and of which we are pretty much unaware. We're not experts.
So I don't know if I want to talk about entropy particularly, but I could see how the claim of entropy might lead to some value being gained in terms of the position of, there has to be a cause. Because the argument is just that there has to be an origin point. But
I think it's not just an origin point. I mean, well, the Christians would argue not only is there a creator, but there's a sustainer as well.
But isn't the argument from there just that God... It sort of sounds like you've shifted the argument from God is the unmoved mover to God is the thing that has the ability to reverse entropy. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I think it would be fair to say that in God there is no entropy, right? In he himself, I would suggest that there is no entropy. He never changes. He is always the same.
Yeah, but in terms of the gain, because what you're saying is the Bertrand Russell doesn't follow because there's a thing called entropy.
Yes, it is in God, according to scriptures at least, in God we find life, and it is God who gives life and empowers life, and life is the force, it seems, that overcomes entropy. When people die, it's because they're literally dying, and their life force, if you want to call it, is draining.
Well, also the idea of entropy, I believe, being the ultimate heat death of the universe or whatever, with the notion being that there's a limited amount in which the productive energy dispersed via the Big Bang or whatever will eventually run out, over billions of years. But I think my go-to would say is that the argument would surely be that I think we're lapsing into the end of human knowledge at this point, especially the end of scientific knowledge. Dear listener, Mariah is rudely a family member. No, we can make this part of the episode. Okay. A family member of the podcast has just rudely interrupted the recording.
And one of the great fans of the podcast, I'd like to say.
Yeah, great fan. But if you're listening to this, you have actively damaged the recording of one of our podcasts. We're calling you out.
Okay, thank you, Elo. I have one more last question before we leave this whole nihilism stuff. I don't know a lot about the philosophy and all that stuff and the nihilism. How do nihilists not lapse into meaninglessness in their own personal lives? I'm really curious because it would seem like if I come out of oblivion, I go to oblivion. What does it matter? I mean, obviously, I can make paintings if I want to. I cannot do paintings if I don't want to. I can write symphonies. I cannot write symphonies. I can work real hard. I cannot work hard.
All right, guys. I'm gonna call the kibosh on this phase of the discussion only because
it's a legitimate question. I was curious.
I absolutely agree. It is a legitimate question. It is in fact the exact question dealt with by such writers as Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus.
Yeah, but do they ever come to an answer?
Yes.
What is their answer?
They have whole philosophical systems to answer this question.
You mean like positivism and existentialism and all this stuff?
Yeah, there's all kinds of
answers. But in the end, like trying to become an authentic person, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
When you lapse into nothingness and oblivion, is meaningless.
Nietzsche even has a specific concept to address this. It's called the eternal recurrence. And he has multiple. I don't know. We can have a whole discussion.
Okay, we'll do that another time.
Episode,
we'll do that a different episode.
But it'd be kind of boring because it's just going over old German and French writers,
which obviously everybody has bought into because.
All right, now
there's large churches of Nietzscheism.
Let me give you.
Okay.
The topic for the episode.
Oh, the topic. Well, we're 20 minutes in. It's the topic of the episode. All right. What is the topic of the episode?
It's not a non sequitur. It's still related to the topic of death.
Oh, death. Always a pleasant topic.
So I was reading, beloved figure, good friend of the show, St. Augustine.
And which of St. Augustine's works are you reading?
The Confessions, where he admits to all his wrongdoings.
And isn't it odd that someone of your age and academic background and intellect would be so long waiting to read the Confessions?
What do you mean so long?
I'm calling you out. It's like one of those books people read in junior high and high school.
All right, your age is showing.
Oh, okay, never mind. Go on.
So, St. Augustine... at this point in the narrative, I'll be reading a paragraph briefly to capture the moment I want to talk about. But the context is, St. Augustine is recently fully converted, has put his faith in Jesus, and he's working under the mentorship and the authority of one Bishop Ambrose. Now, Ambrose, at the start of this chapter, has been revealed that the mother of the current Emperor Valentinian, his mother is Justina, is persecuting Ambrose because she is a follower of the heretic Arian.
Yeah, Ambrose really got into some deep waters there because he offended the political powers that be. Wasn't he exiled, or he was threatened with exile? I know many times if he wasn't
well,
exiled.
He's right now, at this point in the narrative, only being threatened. Which leads to the paragraph. At this time, you revealed to your Bishop Ambrose in a vision the place where the bodies of the martyrs Protasius and Gervasius, fun names, lay hid, which you had for so many years kept incorrupt in the treasury of your secret knowledge, that you might bring them forth at the proper moment to check a woman's fury, the woman being the ruler of the empire. For when they were discovered and dug up, and with due honor brought to Ambrose's basilica, not only were people cured who had been tormented by evil spirits, and the devils themselves first to confess it, but also there was a man, a citizen well known to the city, who had been blind for many years. He asked what was the cause of the tumultuous joy of the people, and when he heard, he sprang up and asked his guide to lead him into the place. When he arrived there, he asked to be allowed to touch with his handkerchief the place on which lay the saints, whose death is precious in your sight. He did so, put the handkerchief to his eyes, and immediately they were opened. As in, he was no longer blind.
Yeah, I got that.
So the specific thing I'm interested in is a curious little phrase he says while describing these, relics of the skeletons, in fact, the bones of these
Wait,
two
I thought
martyrs.
it said it was remarkably preserved.
Yeah, there's some, I was looking at Ambrose's description.
He didn't mean that they actually had the full flesh and all that.
Well, I was looking at Ambrose's description while researching for this episode, and he describes
You researched for the episode? That's
Indeed.
not fair. You researched. I get it just on the fly. Go ahead, though.
He described it as being bones and a surprising amount of blood.
Blood?
Yeah, blood.
Fresh blood?
Apparently.
What? Let the dogs into fight over it.
I don't know how the biology of this
Yeah,
works.
I don't think it does. But go ahead. Okay, so fresh blood, that maybe that was part of the miracle.
Well, the thing I'll say first is, while the thing described here is remarkable, it's not. It's also sort of similar things that one might see in one of those super churches where the pastor performs miracles. Which is to say, I don't think St. Augustine is lying, or that these are not events that happen. I think people, when they touched these relics, did experience remarkable effects on themselves.
That's possible, and in all fairness, Ambrose might have exaggerated the issues.
At that point, we'd have to say,
but there's also the occurrence in writings like this of hagiographies.
Yeah. Well, Augustine is the one writing this down.
Right. So Augustine, let's take him at his word that this is what occurred. This is what occurred from his point of view.
Yeah. I don't think we have to grant per se that
this actually occurred.
Well, no, not. Well, we can see events at these super churches where at that moment
that these were real events,
yeah.
But that the interpretation of them may or may not have been. Okay, go for it.
Now, I'm actually not that interested in whether in the logistics of miracles in this case.
Yeah, for the record, I'm a little bit skeptical, but go ahead.
Well, you don't believe in saint worship?
I'm a little skeptical, but go ahead.
But what I'm interested in is this little phrase tucked in there, which granted might depend on translation, who knows. But it says, when the blind man arrived there, he asked to be allowed to touch with his handkerchief the place on which lay the saints, quote, whose death is precious in your sight, your being God.
Mm-hmm.
Why is their death specifically precious in God's sight?
I think that actually is fairly easy to answer if you give me just a second.
Sure thing.
And what I'm doing, dear listeners, I'm typing into my Bible program I have here, and I pulled it up because I know where it is roughly, but I want to make sure I got it right. So it's Psalm 116, verse 15. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints.
Interesting. Could you read that full context for us?
Sure, the context. This is, I believe it is. I'm not sure who the writer is. I don't think it's David, but he says, I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and supplications. He has inclined his ear to me, therefore I will call upon him as long as I live. The pains of death surrounded me, and the pains of Sheol lay hold of me. I found trouble and sorrow. And I think this would be something we would consider probably a messianic psalm, though if it, I don't want to say for sure, I haven't done the research to say who it is. Pains of Sheol, of course, is just the grave. And he says, then I called upon the name of the Lord. O Lord, I implore you, deliver my soul. Gracious is the Lord and righteous. Yes, our God is gracious. The Lord preserves the simple. I was brought low, and he saved me. So it's about the salvation that God brings, even in the midst of walking through the valley of shadow of death. Return to your rest.
See the pastor in full pastor mode, describing the verse while reading the verse.
Return to your rest, O my soul, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you. For you have delivered my soul from death, my eyes from tears, and my feet from falling. Falling. I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I believed, therefore I spoke. I am greatly afflicted. I said in my haste, all men are liars. What shall I render to the Lord for all his benefits to me? I will take up the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord now in the presence of all his people. And then that verse, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. And I know I've heard for years pastors share this verse at a funeral or something, but basically the idea is that the Lord cares for his saints. He walks with them even through the valley of shadow of death and brings them safely and securely to glory.
Now that's interesting. That to me is more, that's a reading that makes sense to me. Like coming to the text, I would argue that that seemingly is not the understanding Augustine has in this passage, though.
Oh, because you think of the saints, the word saints, or
well, because he's saying he's describing this miracle, and he says, and the implication of the passage is that the reason why the place on which lay the saints, the bones of the saints, have this miracle-making possibility is because their death is precious in your sight.
Wait, can you read that section one more time then?
When he arrived there, he asked to be allowed to touch with his handkerchief the place on which lay the saints, whose death is precious in your sight.
But, okay. I'm not sure I agree with your interpretation of the actual text there. I think what we have here is a parenthetical insertion by Augustine, who says, these saints have died, and then he muses for a moment on the preciousness of the saints to their Lord, and whether or not these two are uniquely saintly or something.
Well, I'd like to imagine, grant me, I think Augustine is a somewhat good writer.
Yes, a prolific writer, if nothing else, yes.
So when he includes a parenthetical like this, I would hope that it would be semi-related to the topic, and that he's not just, by the way, I think the saints are beloved by God.
Okay, well, no, but yes, I agree with you. However, I think you're reading some of the cohesion of rhetoric that we project today from our Hemingway-trained high school classes back onto Augustine. I think it would have been common in Augustine's day to maybe make such a parenthetical insertion. In fact, this was echoed throughout the Middle Ages as the monks would say something, and the whole way of speaking would be infused with quotations from the Psalms, where they would just a thought would lead them into something like this quote from the Psalms. So I don't find this to be that unusual.
But let me hit you with a little bit of defense of my position.
Okay.
Because in terms of relic worship, it kind of, to me, it does make a sort of morbid sense that an item has more spiritual value if it is of someone who is dead and a saint. Because consider, if someone just drinks from a cup,
Mm-hmm.
assumably not an important item,
Mm-hmm.
but if a saint drinks from a cup, it becomes an important item. But that person is not a saint until the point in which they've died and are confirmed to have gone to heaven. So the things become
Yeah.
important only because that person has died at that point.
I think one of the problems here, though, is yes, that I understand that line of